recording.
Well, welcome everybody to the next edition of the Auckland Art Gallery Foundation cocktail chats. Whoops, better get my here's to art and being connected to it again in another couple of days' time. and a very warm welcome to Tonga, who is the curator at the Auckland Art Gallery Tāmaki for Pacific Art. And it's a new role that was established with the help of the Auckland Art Gallery Foundation. So it's our first opportunity actually to welcome Anne, because she's been in the role for 2 months, but actually because of lockdown, we've met more over Zoom than we have in person in most recent times. But Anne, as an artist and a curator, welcomes to the Auckland Art Gallery Foundation. And by way of a very brief introduction, I wanted to say, Anne, that you've had a lot of experience curating in the public gallery sphere. And I wanted to ask you about perhaps what might have been one of your very first curatorial stints, which possibly I'm guessing might have been at the Otara Cube project. I wondered if this might have been one of your first forays into curating, especially in a very public community setting, such as the Otara Cube project in the Otara Town Centre.
Well, kia ora everyone. Thank you, Sue. It's so nice to see everybody, and I'm really honoured to really honoured to be part of these chats, and in lieu of seeing you guys in person, getting to know each other in this way. So when I do see you, we'll pretty much already know each other. But also I thought it'd be good to take this opportunity just to thank all of you, thank the foundation for your role in creating my position. I'm not sure, it started to dawn on me as during the closure, and especially at the pōwhiri for my role, but it was a real historical moment, you know, the first for the Auckland Art Gallery to have a Pacific curator, and also on a national front, one of the only in existence. So thank you all. So the Otara Cube, funnily enough, in terms of my first forays into curating, it was actually as a student at Elam. So like many people, many artists, you know, trying to get a break in an exhibition opportunity, what you do is you create them yourself. So we ended up doing that, I think it was in my second year. You didn't really know what you were doing apart from putting on a show together. And I built in very early quite a respect for curators in terms of getting things in on time. And I made that a mandate for myself in future, that when they ask for things, I would try and send it on time, because it was a nightmare. I'm trying to do it at that stage. So after that, most of my training had been in public institutions. My very first was at the Douse Art Museum, where I was the Bloomhart Foundation curatorial intern. And at the same time, I was splitting my week between that and being a curatorial assistant at Te Papa during the Ngātoi big redevelopment. So I actually did the Otara Cube after those stints in Wellington, when I moved back to Auckland.
Right.
And
you've also worked with a lot of other institutions, you know, Pātaka and St Paul Street Gallery.
Yes, so the last 6 years have been quite a whirlwind for me. I think I'd lived in 4 or 5 different cities. So I've got to intimately know contemporary Pacific art across the country, and the artists there as well, to kind of see the different needs and where the strengths are in different institutional collections.
I think, Anna, you were saying that because you were a curatorial intern also in Dunedin, so you had time there as well. But then it was probably your last role in Rotorua, which has perhaps given you some kind of insight into we might say the unusual beginnings of your experience in Auckland. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, so I was at Rotorua Museum for 2 years, just under 2 years, and had moved back to Auckland in the latter part of 2018. But 6 months into my role at the Rotorua Museum, we actually closed, and that was in part because of the Curator earthquake, which then moved up the country, and it advanced the earthquake strengthening that we were due to do in about a year. So in terms of a curatorial skill set, I wasn't quite prepared for natural disaster. So the first thing I did was I looked to Christchurch, called Lara, and pretty much asked, what does it look like for a curator to have a closed museum? What am I looking at? Because they'd managed to present over 100 projects in that closure. And initially what they'd seen as a 6-month closure ended up, I think, almost 5.5 years. So to try and sustain that base and to make sure that your community is with you, the arts community, in the reopening, is something that was at the forefront, and I think really helpful in this time to know where the priorities are.
I think you mentioned at the beginning that you talked about your role, or the creation of the new role of contemporary curator in Pacific art as being a big moment, a history-making moment. Could you talk a little bit more about that? I wondered have you got mentors that are kind of reference moments for you in terms of this role?
Yes, I have many mentors, which is helpful because in this field, like many, it's a commitment to lifelong learning, which is a little bit intimidating to feel like you're always going to not know something. So very early on, in terms of those internships, they were formative in starting to establish a network of curators across the country, but also other Pacific curators. So when I first moved to Wellington, wonderful Yoki Kihara, the artist, had emailed and used her network to say this Tongan curator is coming down. I wasn't a curator then, I was just, an aspiring one, but is coming down to Wellington. It'd be great if you could all meet her, and maybe it's just different, but they actually took that up and ended up having lunch with a few people. So the first was Sean Mellon, who's a senior curator of Pacific cultures at Te Papa, as well as Ruben Friend, who is now at Pātaka, and Megan Tāmaki Cornell. So that was a very early insight into how you can be quite generous and start to usher people into the field, especially for Pacific people where there aren't many in the curatorial space. So that's been really formative for my learning of what that looks like.
Do you see the role, as and I see this as the same when I'm talking about the role of Auckland Art Gallery, if you like, as being kind of a national leader for the arts and for bringing the voice of artists to a diverse community. So do you see a role of a Pacific art curator, not only perhaps even being national, but we've got to think about the wider Pacific as well, the broader understanding of what that means, Pacific art means?
For sure, and I think that this position is a first commitment towards it, of having somebody dedicated to start to define what the Pacific looks like at Auckland Art Gallery. Because for many, and in terms of Pacific art, Auckland Art Gallery had been a place where people looked to as a thought leader in the Pacific, especially when we look at the development of contemporary Pacific art in the country. And so there's a real opportunity here with this role to lead that.
So coming to the Auckland Art Gallery, I mean, I know you've had a bit of an unusual start because of the lockdown, but in a way, it's given you a little bit of an opportunity, a time for research. And I was going to ask you, what has been your initial focus in terms of just a kind of a grounding into what the Auckland Art Gallery Toyo Tāmaki has been? You mentioned the collection, perhaps. Has that been a good way for you to access into this role through the collection?
Well, I've been writing my thesis. It's due the end of June, that looks at Pacific tries to argue for Pacific curatorial history in Aotearoa. So that's been really the kind of base foundation, which I think will help me in approaching Auckland Art Gallery, because I think in order to kind of advance the discipline of contemporary Pacific art practice, you need this exhibition history, and we don't have one to date in terms of written form. So I'm hoping that that will contribute not only to the kind of scholarship around Pacific art, but also to the approach at Auckland Art Gallery. So that's been at the front of my mind, knowing the exhibitions that have been developed at Auckland Art Gallery or haven't been developed, as well as during this closure, looking at our collection and getting some, you know, kind of reacquainting or getting familiar with our Pacific art collection. So I've started to do some of that analysis to identify where our current kind of strengths and gaps are, and hopefully to build that collection very, very soon in the future.
I mean, for a lot of us who know parts of the collection well, I wondered if you would talk to us about some of the key works that are in the collection that you've been studying, and perhaps go back in time a little bit to start with a very memorable woman from the 1960s and 70s who might be familiar to all of us. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Are you talking about Te Tibo?
I am.
Yes.
Her paintings are some of the most loved in the Auckland Art Gallery collection.
Yep.
And maybe she's a great place to start for us. Can you tell us a little bit about her and how her works? Do you know how her works came into the collection?
I have a fair idea, which is partly based on my thesis. So part of contemporary New Zealand, contemporary Pacific art in Aotearoa, which is where I've kind of focused on, it locates immediately to Paul Tangata and Te Tibo, who were our first, and this is not, you know, trying to think about that time frame of, from 1964 actually onwards, the first two artists that we had that entered a public gallery. And while we know this history that they were the first two, it was really wonderful to think about how did that even happen in terms of very beginnings. And funnily enough, what I'd found is that for most of these opportunities, they were quite fortuitous more than they were strategic. So wider kind of infrastructure changes at Auckland Art Gallery, whether that was intentional or not, actually opened some of these doors. So I think it was the director, Peter Tāmaki, who had embargoed solo exhibitions and had shifted towards more of an anthology, like big survey exhibitions. And what they actually did is created an ecology for dealer gallerists who started to take up that mantle and looked and provided solo exhibitions, which is where Paul Tangata, an Elam graduate in 1964, enters the picture, and a month later Te Tibo. And then
they were real leaders, weren't they? In a way, real kind of leaders at that time in terms of thinking about how artists operate between, we almost might call it a kind of a customary Pacific art practice and a contemporary art practice.
Well, there were weavers kind of active in that time, women, and I think it was the Aotearoa Te Mananui Akiwa Weavers group. So they were active, but just not recognised within galleries. So those two really were, in that sense, the first. And what you found out with Home KL is that their Paul Tangata, you found out where he went. He actually went into I think a career in politics. And then Te Tibo, who was 70 at the time when she started painting, had an active decade of time. So those are our two kind of beginnings, and then there's a few instances in between. So it's been a journey of trying to connect these dots, and I guess in some ways false starts in contemporary Pacific art, and eventually the curation of it.
Yeah, I think as well it's very worthy to make note and recognise, Robin, you're here with us tonight as well.
Yes.
To recognise the magnificent works that are in the collection. Well, Robin, in your own right, you have many works in the Auckland Art Gallery collection, but also in collaboration with Ruha Whitata. Can you tell us a bit about that? Because that was a major acquisition and a generous acquisition that was able to happen for the Auckland Art Gallery a year and a half ago or so, and has been on recent display, and works that truly had the wow factor when you walk into the gallery and first walked into the first rooms, and wonderful, spectacular works there, beautifully curated. Can you tell us a bit about your experience with seeing those in the collection, Arne?
Oh, there's something I think, especially seeing it on display when you walk in through that first gallery, that just stops you in your tracks. But I think in terms of ngapu making generally, it is a real, for me, seeing them and experiencing quite empowering, because they are no different to the way in which I've understood and experienced ngatu in my life. And so I think collaborations like that with Ruha, and also through some other works of Robin's that we have, you know, that they're quite exciting to me.
I also
excite me about the future of collaboration and collective practice, and how we start to imagine the Pacific together.
We're kind of triggering memories of that first exhibition room now, Robin and Annie, because I'm also remembering on the one of the other walls was a photographic series of works by Tasman Togo Brisby, which was, she's now based in Australia, a series of portraits with ships, navigation references on their heads. And there's a connection with you there, Anna, isn't there, with her work and when she was a young student? Am I thinking of the same artist? Did you curate a large work of hers into a student show, perhaps at St Paul Street?
Yes.
Which is mode of presentation was in a way reminding me of Robin and Ruha's work, a large textile hanging on the wall and navigating across the floor.
Yes. So Jasmine Toga Brisby is a South Sea Islander artist, and the work that you're talking about, I think, would be a lovely complement to Robin White's in our collection, just for future. But she,
notepad.
Yeah, but she, I think in that tertiary exhibition, she had taken Chelsea sugar bags and she had beaten them to create the equivalent of a tapa from Vanuatu, which is called an amatsitse. So much of her practice to date looks at the kind of slave diaspora. So she was based in Queensland, but is currently living in Wellington. And that is a history that we don't know very well in terms of visual art practice, but also in Aotearoa, about that slave diaspora. So much of her bodies of works, each work starts to recuperate that knowledge for her own kind of family knowledge, but also more widely in thinking about that. So I think it's an exciting opportunity to think about the Pacific more widely than that.
That's true.
You know,
in the collection, Anne, sorry, I didn't mean to grab you there. I'm thinking about Arnie O'Neill because she's become a wonderful mentor to another whole generation of artists. And there's a really nice historical link with the Auckland Art Gallery, drawing a long bow, but thinking about your curating of her project as part of the Room series at Object Space last year, I think it was. And
you've really done your homework, Sue.
And it was a project that was recreated from 1993. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Anna?
So her project for the Room is called Promise Me, Trust Me, and it was her end of year Elam project. So in 1993, I think it was when the building, our actual building, was part of a telecom, a communication building. They actually allowed Elam students and staff to go in and present their work there, and she did a site specific response in that building, which I'd only seen on slide and had never seen again. And you know, I think as a curator, you just, or even as a collector, you book these moments in your mind and you think, when can I return back to them? Can I? And what is the right context for that? So part of it's a little bit selfish. I wanted to see it again. So we kind of remade this project, and in that telecom building she had put an installation into a cloakroom. So all of that kind of building was there except for this cloakroom where they had kind of floral wallpaper and this kind of brown dingy carpet. And so she thought about domesticating the space, and she had put her grandmother's hats into them. And so when we reconstructed this space at Object Space, we thought it might be an opportunity to invite other women, other Cook Island women from around Ponsonby to also come in and bring their hats to start to share some of these histories. And we did that, and it was one of the most rewarding projects to date that I still think about. Makes me a bit teary, but for some, she also had a video footage that we digitized of a big church event that they had at the PIC Newton Church. So for many of those elderly women that came in, they were able to share some of those stories, but also to see their friends in this video and use a space like that. So yeah, those are the kinds of stories and I think projects I'd love to bring to Auckland Art Gallery.
So the building you mentioned, and for the ones, some of our audience who may not know, that building that was then in the process of being transferred by the Auckland Contemporary Art Trust to Auckland Council to become the new gallery. So this was the exhibition that Anne's referring to, was the last exhibition that was in the building there before it became part of the Auckland Art Gallery and became the new gallery. But with all this research that you've been doing in your lockdown time, you really, I think, got you mentioned to me that you had a bit of a light bulb moment about the history of Pacific art curating. And do you feel, what are some of the exciting things coming through that you're seeing in terms of Pacific exhibitions or opportunities for Pacific artists? Can you kind of track as in terms of maybe some interesting things happening? You mentioned about the idea about collaboration, and I wonder if that might be something that you're particularly interested in your curating, to collaborate with others.
I think, I'm trying to recall that conversation.
You had some colleagues that were interested.
The light bulb moment that I can't remember.
Yeah. Well, you talked to me a bit about how in the history of kind of the curating of Pacific art, that back in the day, you know, there was often a separation between kind of things that were seen as anthropological objects. Went to the Auckland Museum, and things that were kind of deemed as fine art, which went into the Auckland Art Gallery. But you know, so in terms of a kind of a trajectory of how not only art is being curated and art objects are being redefined, but I think it has particular relevance, and perhaps for you in terms of Pacific art curating.
Yeah, well, I think that moment came just before I started at Rotorua Museum, because at the time there was just more Pacific curators at different institutions. I mean that in terms of ethnicity, but also in commitment to that discipline. And there was myself, there's Sean Mellon and Fuli Pereira, who were the first in 1992, and for a very long time it was just them. So I think also when this job happened and when he was at my pōwhiri, he turned to me and he goes, we've been waiting for this date for a long time. And I went, oh my goodness, I'm trying to keep it together.
Yeah, you did very well, by the way.
yeah, but in 2016 there were I did look at that. There's Leafa Wilson at Waikato Art Museum. There's my sister, who is now the curator of contemporary art at Te Papa, and Ioana, who was at Te Uru. And you just start to look at this and think, how did we get here? And I think that happens in tandem with the development of contemporary Pacific art, that there is so much dynamism in the diversity of interests. From the 90s, it was a kind of how to, I guess, if you were going to reconcile between the traditional and the contemporary, and now, you know, just such a diversity of thought, critical thought, and trying to, I think that necessitates a shift in the way that we have to curate, and perhaps why we have this role in others in the country, try and keep up with that and to develop the scholarship and discourse around it. And I think at Auckland Art Gallery that's happening already, you know, with lots of research and really great research outputs for exhibitions like the Louise Henderson exhibition, which is touring the country and has a beautiful publication. And that's what I want for Pacific.
Yeah. You were interviewed once by Ron Brownson, who of course is a colleague of yours now at the Auckland Art Gallery, and he asked you about what you thought the role of the curator was, and I think he made reference to something that Nina might have advised you, which was that a good curator can curate anything.
Oh, she's a liar. No,
I was going to ask you, what did you think about that?
No, it's because she's an art historian. No, but I think in terms of the trajectory for many Pacific curators now, it isn't the kind of traditional trajectory through art history. For me, it was art history eventually, but first through fine arts practice. So maybe in terms of looking at that history now, that's where you get some of that dynamism through people like Jim Viviide and Bottled Oceans. Only an artist would treat a curator, treat an exhibition like that, of looking at artworks as components of your larger installation. You could not do that now. I wouldn't dare do that now. I'd never hear the end of it.
But if you're writing your thesis, I imagine the exhibition Bottled Ocean, which I think started in Wellington and then came to Auckland Art Gallery.
Yes.
What was the date of that? Because that's really a landmark moment in Pacific art.
1994.
Oh, right. Well, that's not that long ago.
Yeah, and Jim Viviide, the Cook Islands artist, like Jim Viviide, Cook Island artist and curator, was somebody that also critiqued the idea and the methods of curating within his artistic practice. So in other bodies of work, he'd borrow different works from museums along with his own, and really did test the power of display through juxtaposition. I think it was part also of a global movement of the artist and curator. You think about, you know, mining the museum was part of the kind of critique at the time that I think eventually made its way here.
So thinking about the museum and audiences, especially in what might be from tomorrow, a kind of a new world of experiencing museums. How important to you is the idea of access of bringing audiences to art or taking art to audiences? What's your
incredibly important
thinking around that?
That's why I chose to curate, in all honesty, because when curate within larger institutions, it is the platform to make, I think, many things visible and to give access to art to people in a place where you can actually be in service. And that's kind of in terms of my personal take of how I see access in this role. Because, as you said, I'd had many different experiences. One also included a small stint as a dealer gallerist, and don't laugh, Hamish, but I learnt that I could not sell a work to save my life, and that redirected me back into public institutions. But I remember the gallery that I was at was across the road from Auckland Art Gallery, and I always thought one day I would make it over there.
Well, welcome. To finish up, I think it's really worth also mentioning a major moment in terms of Auckland Art Gallery's engagement with Pacific artists is the Pacific Sisters exhibition, which of course was at the gallery, a year ago, I think. A project again that came from Te Papa and up to the Auckland Art Gallery, and it was a real moment, I think, of bringing in a diversity of practice in particular, and was a fantastic way actually of making reference back to the kind of near past in terms of the rise and the advocacy strength of a lot of those artists, Rosanna Raymond and Lisa Rehana. You know, that was where they found their voice, was through the Pacific Sisters. So to have that there, got some good things to kind of build on, and in your research that you've done, and so I guess I wanted to finish with thinking about one work in the Auckland Art Gallery collection, which was the Andreas Gursky photograph called Ocean 3, which was shown at the Auckland Art Gallery when it was first acquired, an extraordinarily large photograph of the Pacific. Can you tell us, how do you see the Pacific? What does the Pacific mean to you? What is it apart from a geography of an ocean? What does it mean that you might like to kind of bring forth?
Well, the way I view the Pacific is there are many ways you could think about it as a descriptor of peoples, of a place. And for me, that place is quite expansive. Yeah. It's defined by our ocean, which is 2/3 of the world's surface. So in terms of how I think about Pacific, I don't really think too much. It's quite easy to of what the Pacific is for me. It's a way of being. In terms of geography, it is a connector between us and Hawaii in the north, and Papua in the west, and Rapa Nui in the east. And in terms of trying to understand it, because it can be quite an unwieldy thing, the Pacific, the ocean, and it's where, in different exhibitions you start to piece away at what that means and understanding, but there's always more to learn. And with that, I think it enriches a way of viewing and understanding your place in the world. And that's what it's done for me, and I think it can only be helpful to others.
We look forward to meeting you in person, Anne, and sharing the journey with you in your exploration. And I wonder if we would like to hand it over to anyone of our audience who are listening here who might have a comment to make, or make a reference to works or artists that they know. I know for myself, in the last Chartwell collection exhibition, there was a commission of Janet Lilo's, which I really enjoyed, and it was wonderful to see. So there's been some fantastic examples of Pacific art, and to see Yoki Kahara's work there in the gallery quite recently as well, her recent project. So there's been some moments of great opportunity to see things happening. So there'll be more too. So can I hand it over in case there's anyone who has any words?
No, we have a question from Andrew Smith.
Firstly, Arnie and Sue, thank you for the last half hour. It's been fascinating. And while meeting you on Zoom is not perfect, it's way, way better than not meeting you at all. So our warm thanks for the last half hour. Just a couple of comments I'd like to make. I think back to the trustees meeting when Kirsten came to the trustees with the suggestion that we might like to support the role of the Curator Pacific Art. And without exception, the trustees embraced that idea, because we really felt it was an opportunity for us to do something different for the gallery, and something to which our donors would really, really warmly respond. And so we were very happy to say, yes, please, we're into that. And of course, now having met you, it's so much more the right decision to have made. But the other comment I'd like to make is that some of the most wonderful foundation events we've had for our donors have been when we've had a curator show us around an exhibition in the gallery. And they have been really special events for our donors. And all I can say is, I look forward to the day, Arnie, when you are showing our donors around your first curated show. So welcome to the gallery, and welcome to the foundation, and many, many thanks for this evening. It's been really interesting and great to have you on board.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm taken aback.
That's wonderful. Well, look, thank you all for joining us. I'll hand you over to Penny, because she'll have some updates about what's coming up. But I want to say thank you to you, Anne, very much for your time. We've really enjoyed the conversation, and the focus as well on the artists. many of which I know will be thrilled to have you there part of the team. So we look forward to
I think that about wraps it up. I don't see that we have any other questions at the moment. So I do want to say thank you to both Anne and Sue for a very interesting conversation. Fabulous to have you with us tonight. And definitely we do look forward to the opportunity to have some events where you are with us, Anne. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much.
What's coming up next week, Penny?
Oh, next week we've got Michael Lett talking with Mary Kisler.
Great.
The same time Wednesday night. We look forward to more of you joining us again next week.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Anna.
Thank you all.
Thank
Have a
you
good
so
evening.
much. That was great.
Thank you.
Fiona.